What's going on, everybody? It's Jeff Iafrate from Crunch Time here to discuss the Brad Holmes press conference that happened today. Thankfully, all of our local beat reporters have it covered. Wasn't on YouTube, wasn't able to watch it. I'm going to break down some of the best quotes from the press conference, and we can discuss it. So let's do it. I'll start with the first couple of things he said, which, I think are the most important, especially considering the conversation the last couple of weeks has been, will he trade up? Will he trade back? It feels like with Brad Holmes, it's damn near impossible to predict, but that's what makes this whole thing fun. When you have a GM that's not so good at identifying talent in the draft, typically you're sitting there going, okay, I'd rather you stay put, you take the best player available. Just don't fuck this up, please. With Brad Holmes, it's a little different. You're not as stressed out. You'd prefer him to be a little more flexible because when you give a guy like Brad Holmes more flexibility, AKA trading back, getting more assets, it's actually more beneficial to your franchise. So in this scenario, when we discuss trading back, Brad Holmes spoke about that as well. And I'll read the quote here and give credit to who said it. Then we'll get to trading up. But trading down, Colton Pouncey put this out, and so did a lot of others, but shout out to Colton Pouncey. He put out Lions GM Brad Holmes on the idea of trading down with the draft in Detroit. He said, quote, "We have to do the right thing for the organization," end quote. Hopefully, quote, "hopefully our fans will forgive us," end quote. So he already is kind of preparing for that possibility. He also spoke about trading up. He said he's not ruling out the idea of trading up, but he says it has to be the right fit, which makes sense, right? You're not going to give away your cards and say, well, we plan to trade up. Well, we plan to trade back. But you got to look at it and look at this draft and look at the talent in this draft. And I'll immediately point to offensive line and wide receiver because I do think, and Bill Belichick went on Pat McAfee yesterday and talked about how this class of tackles is the deepest class we've seen in a couple of years. I could say the same thing for wide receiver. I think wide receiver this year is one of the deepest classes. So when you look at O-line and you look at wide receiver, two positions that the Lions, they don't desperately need, but you assume they will take an offensive lineman at some point and a wide receiver, it makes perfect sense for a round 2, round 3 selection. So trading back, if you're going to get one of those two positions, makes perfect sense, or just simply waiting and taking one with their second round pick or third round pick makes a lot of sense. When you bring up corner and edge, which is the two positions that I prefer with the first round pick or your first selection if you trade back or trade up, you look at the first 2 rounds and there's a lot of talent there. I mean, you start with edge. When you get past Latu, and Jared Verse, you can get to Adisa Isaac, who I think is still a really, really good edge. Even Chop Robinson, if you're a fan of him. There's some guys that are going to be there in round 2. Darius Robinson, another one, which you could trade back and potentially still get, depending on what intel Brad gets for the teams behind him. But you could still get a pretty productive player in round 2 or late in the first round if you're not trading up. Now, corner is another position that I think if you trade back, there will be some talent there. Quinyon Mitchell, Terrion Arnold, Nate Wiggins. Obviously, those guys are going to be first-round picks, probably mid-first-round picks. But if you do trade back or even stay put, Kool-Aid McKinstry, right? TJ Tampa, Kamari Lassiter, Max Melton. There's some corners that are going to be round 2 picks. If you want to go round 3, Renardo Green, another guy to Florida State. And I talked about him in my most recent mock draft, which you can check out on our channel. Did it about a week ago. So there is, at least for those two positions, corner and edge, round 1 and 2, you can still get talent. That's why when Brad, brought up there's more first rounders in this year than last year, when they say, at least judging the players, first round talent, that is significant, guys. It's so significant. You got to listen to what they say. Big shout out to Rod Beard. He always used to say this, and Rod is a legend in this city. He's been covering the Pistons. Now he works for just the Detroit News and does a lot other things than just the Detroit Pistons. But Rod always used to tell me, Jeff, listen to what they say. People try to overthink what Holmes or Weaver at the time. He's still the GM, but it is when he was covering the Pistons. What these guys say, they overthink. They try to process it. It's really that simple. When Brad says this year has more first-round talent than prior years, or at least last year, that has to tell you something. That has to indicate that trading back is on the table. And I think it's probably more likely than trading up. Even though for me, I'd prefer they trade up for the best possible edge or corner. I would lean trade back at this point because of the points I gave you with some of the positions the Lions need, how deep of a class it is for O-line, wide receiver, how there's still talent in the second round at corner and edge, and just judging how you're picking at 29, which is such an awkward pick, by the way. It's back of the first round. It's basically a second round pick, but you also have to keep in mind teams are going to be interested in trading into the first round for that fifth year option. So if Brad is sitting there at 29 and you're looking at some of the players available and you think, you know what, the fifth year option, yeah, there's value there, but we can trade back and still get talent. I mean, look at last year, Sam Laporta, Brian Branch. Those are two guys that, I mean, especially Sam Laporta, who's already one of the best at his own position as a rookie, and he's only going to continue to get better. But also Brian Branch, who I think will be a future all-pro player. That's what you got in the second round. So you can bring up the Josh Pascals or the Levi Onwuzurike's, like that's fair. But based off last year, and that was a class that, remember Brad said, wasn't that deep in the first round. They got a lot of talent in the second. I think this year's a little different because there's a lot more first rounders that could fall into the second round. Guys that have first round grades that could fall. And you're seeing it now in mock drafts. I mean, I saw Jackson Powers Johnson in the second round of Mel Kiper's draft. And he's kind of talked about that as well as that being a potential realistic situation. So I think this is a great, great opportunity for Brad Holmes just to do what he does best, which is, I know we've heard it a lot, but cook, right? Let Brad Holmes cook. And there's truth to that because when you have Brad Holmes, and it's a luxury to have a guy like that. It truly is. I mean, not every GM, you walk into any draft and you're like, just handle it. And you don't really have to do much research on draft picks. Obviously, we have to because this is what we do. But if you're just a casual fan, you probably have given less shits about this draft than prior because you're just like, you know what? Brad Holmes is just going to take care of it. And that's why when I see these quotes kind of hinting at like, hey, we could trade back. Everybody in Detroit, forgive us. I know it's in Detroit. People could freak out. I don't really care. I mean, this is about winning football games. So at the end of the day, it's not the end of the world. We'll still have plenty to talk about. And you're still going to walk away with 3 to 4 impactful players. That's just how it goes. He does this every year. 3 to 4 impactful players, which is a common thing among NFL teams. Usually you're walking out with 1, 2, maybe 3. You're going to find a handful of guys. And you got to think, too, the Lions traded away their third-round pick for Carlton Davis. So if there's a possibility that he could trade back and recoup that pick or recoup draft capital, then it makes perfect sense and still land somebody that Brad Holmes feels great about. I think this is a great scenario for Brad. So trading back seems like the most likely scenario. And please share your thoughts on that and really your comfortability with it. And I know a lot of you guys would be like, hey, I'm cool with it, which you should be. He also said, and I thought this was great. He said that him and Dan were on an island last year in the draft, in the war room, when a player was selected. And I'll get to that in a second. And the rest of the guys in the room had a different player they preferred at that position. But Dan and Brad stood on an island and said, you know what, we're taking this player. And I think that player was Sam Laporta. Because you know who went a pick right after him? Michael Mayer. So that's what I believe. And I thought that was a really interesting quote because it speaks to kind of Brad. You know, that happens in war rooms, right? Like there's going to be scouts and different front office members that are like, hey, we're higher on this player. Then Brad Holmes is like, listen, cool story, bro. But yeah, I'm Brad Holmes and I'm going with Sam Laporta. And Dan Campbell felt the same way. And it just kind of speaks to how in lockstep those two are to begin with, which is great because thank God they took Sam Laporta. He is a hell of a player, and it worked out, obviously. I mean, you know, Michael Mayer, he's going to be a fine player, but Sam Laporta has like multi-all-pro 1,000-yard season potential. I mean, he almost had it last year, and he was injured. So I can't wait. Having a guy like Brad Holmes makes the draft so much more fun. And in Detroit, having a GM who can identify talent no matter where it is in the draft is just, it doesn't happen. So please share your thoughts on some of the things Brad said down below in the comment section. I want your guys' thoughts. Do you believe he'll trade up? He spoke on it. I think he'll trade back. And I think that's the more realistic scenario. But what do you guys think? Comment down below. Subscribe if you haven't already. We just hit 5,500 subscribers thanks to you guys. So we're trying to hit 6,000. So please support the channel, like the video, turn on notifications because you'll get notified every time we post, which is super important. And we're live every weekday, 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Check me out and the fellas out every single day. And we'll be live downtown next week. Next Thursday, we'll be at Bookie's Bar and Grill. Get your tickets. Link in the description. Come hang with us. There'll be former Lions, former Red Wings players. All ticket purchases go towards a charitable cause. It does. And it's going to be a lot of fun. We'll be doing a live show out there. So if you're looking for a place to go and you're not really sure where to, buy tickets. Come hang out. It'll be a VIP party, exclusive, and it'll be a home for you. Rather than walking around Detroit with 500,000 to 1 million people down there and you're lost and it's packed. You get a place to go. So please get those as well. Until next time, I'll catch you guys.